Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive?
Absolutely, let's do it.
Today we're tackling Down syndrome, and we've got some seriously fresh insights thanks to this incredible article from the Advocate Voice. It's called Understanding Down Syndrome: Key Facts, Causes, and Support in 2024. So we're talking hot off the press information here.
And I have to say, what excites me about this article is that it goes way beyond the basics. We're going to be diving into the latest advancements, the cutting edge of support and understanding, all within the context of 2024. It's a
Yeah.
whole new perspective.
I totally agree. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's quickly touch base on the fundamentals. Down syndrome, it's a genetic condition, right? We're talking about an extra copy of chromosome 21, but the article makes it crystal clear that Down syndrome isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Exactly. It's definitely not one size fits all. It's more about a spectrum of experiences and possibilities, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And that's where these three types of Down syndrome come into play. Honestly, this is something I think a lot of people aren't even aware of. There's trisomy 21, which is the most common, sure, but then you've got mosaicism and translocation. These aren't just fancy scientific terms, they actually represent real differences in how that extra chromosome actually shows up.
And those differences, they have huge implications. Think
Mhm.
about translocation, for instance. It can actually be inherited, which opens up a whole other conversation about family planning and the importance of genetic counseling.
Which actually reminds me, we've got to address all those misconceptions floating around about Down syndrome. Always happy, always hereditary, people with Down syndrome can't live independently. This article tackles those myths head on, which is fantastic.
About time, right? Those stereotypes are so harmful and they just limit our understanding.
100%. It's not about putting people in these neat little boxes. It's about appreciating the amazing diversity within the Down syndrome community.
I couldn't agree more.
So, now that we've busted those myths, how about we try to unravel what actually causes Down syndrome? Ready for a mini biology lesson?
Always?
Don't worry, I promise we'll keep it interesting. So basically, it boils down to like a random error that happens during cell division, like a tiny hiccup in this otherwise perfect process of how our bodies create reproductive cells.
And that hiccup, as you call it, that's what leads to that extra copy of chromosome 21 in most cases. The article uses this term de novo mutations, meaning they happen spontaneously. They're not inherited.
De novo, I'm going to have to remember that one. But that distinction is important, right? Because it really highlights that in most cases, Down syndrome isn't anyone's fault.
Exactly. It's just one of those fascinating and sometimes unpredictable quirks of biology.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to translocation, which, unlike those de novo occurrences, can be passed down through families. It adds another layer to think about.
It definitely does.
Okay, so we've got these different types. We're starting to understand a bit about that extra chromosome 21, but what does this actually look like in the real world? How does this genetic difference actually manifest itself in the lives of individuals with Down syndrome? Let's unpack that as we keep diving deeper. So we've covered some pretty complex genetics, but now I want to talk about what that actually looks like in a person's life. You know, the article goes into some of those physical characteristics that people often associate with Down syndrome.
And I think it's important as we have this conversation to remember that variation is huge. These are just general markers we're talking about, not like a checklist that you can use to diagnose somebody.
Right, right, of course. Like, you can't say that everyone with blue eyes loves chocolate ice cream. There's no connection there. But I have to admit, some of these characteristics I had no clue. For example, I never knew that a single deep crease across the palm of the hand can be common in people with Down syndrome.
Yeah, it's one of those subtle things that a lot of people probably wouldn't even recognize.
Right, it really just goes to show how this condition can present itself in so many different ways.
Absolutely. It's all part of that beautiful tapestry of human variation.
I like that. But along with the physical characteristics, the article also talks about the increased risk for certain health challenges that individuals with Down syndrome might face.
And it's definitely important to acknowledge those challenges, but I always think it's crucial to approach these conversations with a sense of optimism. Yes, there's an increased likelihood of certain conditions, but early intervention and ongoing good medical care, these things can have a huge, huge impact.
Absolutely. It's not about doom and gloom. It's about being aware and proactive. And speaking of awareness, the article mentioned something else I thought was interesting. It talks about a higher susceptibility to respiratory infections for individuals with Down syndrome.
And that's because the development of the immune system can be affected by that extra chromosome 21, right? But the encouraging thing is that researchers are making some really impressive strides in understanding these vulnerabilities and coming up with new and more effective treatments.
which is really exciting. And it actually kind of relates to all of the incredible advancements that are happening in the field of Down syndrome support in general, something that we're going to dive into more a little bit later. But before we get ahead of ourselves, there's one more piece of the puzzle I want to make sure we cover, and that's the topic of cognitive abilities and learning styles.
Because this is another area where those harmful stereotypes that we talked about,
Hmm.
they really tend to pop up.
Mm.
I think it's so crucial to remember that cognitive abilities, they're just as diverse within the Down syndrome community as they are in any population.
It's a spectrum, right? Just like everything else we've been discussing.
Exactly, a spectrum. And I think that's important. Just as important as acknowledging that range, I mean, we have to recognize that individuals with Down syndrome, they might learn differently than their peers.
And so it's about providing the support that they need in order to thrive.
Exactly. It's about fostering a love of learning no matter what, celebrating individual strengths, regardless of what some standardized test might say.
And speaking of creating supportive environments, I think this is the perfect segue to talk about what I personally find to be the most exciting part of all of this. The incredible advancements happening in Down syndrome support in 2024, especially this year. The article really shines a light on all of the positive changes and these groundbreaking breakthroughs that are quite literally shaping the future for individuals with Down syndrome and their families.
Reading about it, just it gives me so much hope. It really does feel like a new era of support, and it's one that is so focused on empowerment and inclusion.
Okay, folks, buckle up because we're about to explore the cutting edge of Down syndrome support. All right, so we're talking about all this amazing support for people with Down syndrome, especially now in 2024. And the article really lays it all out, doesn't it? 5 key areas where we're seeing such incredible progress: early intervention, education, social integration, technology, and of course, building a support network.
It's like they created this roadmap,
Mm.
a roadmap for empowerment. And what I think is so striking is how interconnected these 5 areas actually are. It's not about just focusing on one thing. It's about this holistic approach, right?
Mhm.
Supporting the whole individual.
I love that. Okay, so let's start with early intervention because you seem really fired up about this. What's got you so excited in this area?
Well, it's the focus on starting therapies early, earlier than ever before even. We're talking about like right there in the neonatal intensive care unit. Recognizing a child's potential from day one, intervening early to help them reach their full potential.
Wow, it's about giving these kids a head start right from the very beginning.
Exactly. And it's not just the traditional physical therapy or occupational therapy. This article talks about some amazing advances in early communication intervention. Like, get this, there are AI-powered apps now that can actually analyze a child's drawing and translate it into speech.
Wow, that's amazing.
Isn't it incredible? It's like they can give a voice to children who haven't even developed verbal communication skills yet.
That's really remarkable. So we're talking about like harnessing the power of technology in such an incredible way. But what happens when we move beyond those early years, What's happening in the world of education for kids with Down syndrome?
Inclusion, inclusion, inclusion.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about. We are finally starting to see a real shift away from those segregated classrooms
Mhm.
and moving more towards integrating students with Down syndrome into mainstream schools.
Mm.
Of course, they need the right supports in place.
And in this article really emphasizes those individualized education programs, the IEPs, right?
Absolutely.
These really tailored learning plans.
Right, because one size does not fit all when it comes to education. And the article highlights some really amazing schools that are going above and beyond, incorporating things like assistive technology, visual learning tools, and they even have specialized therapies right there in the classroom.
It sounds like it's all about creating an environment where everybody feels supported, everybody feels empowered to learn, and it sounds like social integration is a really important part of that as well.
It's huge. The article, it actually mentions this surge in peer support programs and inclusive recreational activities. We're talking about things like unified sports teams, where athletes with and without intellectual disabilities can play together. Or, adaptive dance classes that are designed to accommodate different physical abilities.
It's so cool, breaking down those barriers, fostering this sense of belonging, being part of a community. And it sounds like technology is also playing a really critical role in facilitating these connections as well.
Oh, 100%. And it's not just like those communication apps anymore, although, those are obviously still so important. This article actually talks about using virtual reality to help individuals with Down syndrome learn to navigate social situations and develop some of those essential life skills.
Wow, VR, that's amazing.
Right. Imagine being able to practice ordering food at a restaurant,
Mm.
or asking for help in a store, all within this really safe virtual environment where you can, like, get comfortable with those interactions.
It's like taking all the anxiety out of it and making it fun too. But all this support, it doesn't just magically happen, does it? What about building those essential support networks?
That's where those national Down syndrome organizations come into play. And the local ones too. They can be such a lifeline for families. They're not just providing information and resources, but they're also fostering these incredible communities where people can connect with others who really, really get it.
It's that feeling that you're not alone, and I think that is so powerful.
This article, it doesn't shy away from the challenges,
Hmm.
but it also reminds us that this journey of Down syndrome, it's also incredibly rewarding.
It's about celebrating those abilities, advocating for what's right, and creating a world where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued.
Yep.
And I think that's a perfect place to wrap up this deep dive.
I agree. Yeah.
We've covered so much today, from the complexities of the genetics all the way to these really exciting and cutting-edge advancements that are giving us so much hope for the future for individuals with Down syndrome and their families.
It's inspiring, isn't it, to see how much progress has been made?
It really is. So if there's just one thing I hope you take away from this deep dive today, it's that Down syndrome, it's not a definition, it's a starting point. It's a journey of discovery, of pushing boundaries, and ultimately embracing the beautiful diversity that makes us human.